On September 12, 1985, at approximately 7:42 p.m., a 16-year-old babysitter named Sarah Chen descended a carpeted staircase into the basement of a split-level home in McLean, Virginia, carrying a roll of paper towels and a bottle of cleaning spray, unaware that what she was about to discover would lead to the dismantling of a Soviet intelligence operation that had been running successfully on American soil for more than 7 years. The house belonged to the Volkov family, and Sarah had been babysitting for them twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, since January of that year. 8 months of what had seemed like straightforward, unremarkable work, watching 2 small children while their parents attended evening language classes at a community center in nearby Falls Church. Sarah was a junior at McLean High School, a quiet, methodical student who maintained a 3.8 GPA while working 2 part-time jobs to save money for college. Her parents, Michael and Lisa Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in 1972 and had instilled in their daughter a strong work ethic and an emphasis on education that manifested in Sarah's careful approach to everything she did, from her schoolwork to her babysitting responsibilities. She had found the position through a notice on the bulletin board at the public library, a handwritten index card offering $12 an hour for child care 2 evenings per week, and she had called the number that same afternoon. The interview had been brief and professional. Dmitry and Anna Volkov had asked standard questions about her experience, her availability, and her comfort level with young children, and Sarah had been hired on the spot. The Volkovs lived in a neighborhood of similar split-level homes built in the late 1960s, houses with small front yards and chain-link fences separating one property from the next. Dmitry worked as a software engineer at a technology firm called Advanced Systems Corporation, located in Tyson's Corner, a company that held contracts with the Department of Defense to develop computer systems for military applications. Anna worked part-time as a translator at the Library of Congress, a position she had held since 1980, translating Russian language materials and assisting researchers who needed access to Soviet publications and documents. They had 2 children, Elena, who was 6 years old and in 1st grade, and Alexei, who was 4 and attended preschool 3 mornings a week. The family had come to the United States in 1978, refugees from the Soviet Union who had been sponsored by a resettlement organization and had become naturalized American citizens in 1983. They spoke English with slight accents, attended a Russian Orthodox church in Arlington, and seemed to Sarah like any other immigrant family navigating the complexities of building a life in a new country while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. On that Thursday evening, Sarah had arrived at the Volkov home at 6:30 p.m. as scheduled. Dmitry and Anna had left for their class at 6:45, and Sarah had spent the next hour playing board games with Elena and Alexei in the living room, then preparing dinner, macaroni and cheese from a box with carrot sticks on the side, a meal the children ate without complaint while Sarah cleaned up the kitchen. At approximately 7:35, Alexei had knocked over his cup of apple juice, and the liquid had spread across the table and dripped onto the linoleum floor, creating a sticky mess that required more than just a dishcloth to address properly. Sarah had gone to the kitchen closet where the Volkovs kept cleaning supplies, but the paper towels were nearly gone, just 2 sheets left on the roll, and she remembered that Anna had mentioned keeping extra supplies in the basement. Sarah had been to the basement only twice before, both times to move laundry from the washer to the dryer at Anna's request. The basement was unfinished, with exposed ceiling joists and a concrete floor painted gray. The stairs descended along the back wall of the house, opening into a space that contained a furnace, a water heater, the washer and dryer, and several shelves where Anna stored bulk purchases of household items, paper products, canned goods, and cleaning supplies. But there was also a door along the far wall, a wooden door with a deadbolt lock. and in the 8 months Sarah had been coming to this house, she had never seen that door open. She had noticed it, certainly, had registered its presence, and assumed it led to storage, or perhaps to mechanical systems that the family preferred to keep secured for safety reasons. But on September 12th, as Sarah reached the bottom of the basement stairs and walked toward the shelves where the paper towels were kept, she saw that the door was slightly ajar, open perhaps 2 or 3 inches, enough to reveal darkness beyond, and to make clear that whatever was on the other side was not currently locked. Sarah stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, paper towels and cleaning spray in hand, staring at the partially open door for what felt like several minutes, but was probably closer to 30 seconds. The logical thing to do was to ignore it, to grab what she needed and return upstairs to clean up the spilled juice before it dried into a sticky residue that would be harder to remove. But curiosity, that fundamental human impulse to understand what has been deliberately hidden, pulled her attention toward the gap in the doorway. She walked slowly across the concrete floor, her sneakers making soft, squeaking sounds with each step. And when she reached the door, she paused again, listening for any sound from upstairs that might indicate the children needed her attention. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of a television cartoon playing in the living room. Sarah pushed the door open slightly wider, just enough to see inside without fully entering the space. What she saw was a small room, approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, with a single overhead light fixture that was currently off, leaving the space illuminated only by the ambient light from the main basement area. Against the far wall stood a metal filing cabinet, olive green and institutional-looking, the kind of cabinet that might be found in a government office or a school administrator's room. Next to the filing cabinet was a wooden desk with a chair tucked beneath it, and on the desk's surface Sarah could see what appeared to be photographs, loose and unorganized, along with a notepad and several pens. In the corner of the room, partially obscured by shadow, was equipment that Sarah did not immediately recognize, a collection of black boxes with dials and switches, and an antenna extending upward from one of the units. There were also cardboard boxes stacked along one wall, 3 boxes of varying sizes, and on the side of one box Sarah could see writing in what she recognized as Cyrillic script, the alphabet used in Russian language. The filing cabinet had a lock, a small keyhole beneath the top drawer's handle, and when Sarah stepped closer and tried the drawer, she found it would not open. She did not touch anything else. She backed out of the room carefully, pulled the door until it was in the same position she had found it, slightly ajar but not fully closed, and went to retrieve the paper towels from the shelves. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah began paying attention to things she had previously ignored or dismissed as unremarkable aspects of the Volkov family's routine. On September 19th, a Tuesday evening, she noticed that Dmitri came home from work at his usual time, approximately 6:15 p.m., but instead of spending time with the children before he and Anna left for their class, he went directly to the basement. Sarah heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the distinctive sound of a door opening and closing, and when she glanced at the kitchen clock she noted the time. Dmitri remained in the basement for 23 minutes. When he emerged, he went upstairs to change clothes, came back down, kissed Elena and Alexei goodbye, and left with Anna at 6:45. The pattern repeated on September 24th and again on September 26th. Always the same sequence, always approximately 20 to 25 minutes in the basement immediately after arriving home from work. Sarah also began noticing Anna's phone conversations. The Volkovs had a wall-mounted telephone in the kitchen with a long, coiled cord that allowed the user to move several feet away from the base while talking, and Anna frequently made calls during the early evening hours before she and Dmitri left for class. Sarah had heard these conversations before, but had never paid attention to them, assuming they were routine calls to friends or family members. But now, listening more carefully, Sarah realized that Anna always spoke in Russian during these calls, which was not unusual in itself. Many immigrant families maintained their native language at home. But what struck Sarah as odd was how quickly the conversations ended whenever Sarah entered the room. On October 1st, Sarah had been in the living room with the children when she heard Anna's voice from the kitchen, speaking rapidly in Russian. The words unintelligible to Sarah, but the tone suggesting some kind of business discussion rather than casual conversation. Sarah had walked toward the kitchen to ask Anna a question about dinner, and the moment she appeared in the doorway, Anna had switched abruptly to English, said something brief and generic into the phone about calling back later, and hung up. The expression on Anna's face, a quick flash of something that might have been annoyance or concern before settling back into her usual pleasant demeanor, stayed with Sarah for the rest of the evening. On October 3rd, Sarah made a decision that she would later describe to federal investigators as both impulsive and calculated. The children were napping upstairs, both of them exhausted from a busy day at school and unlikely to wake for at least another hour. Sarah went down to the basement, moving quietly despite the fact that she was alone in the house, and walked directly to the door that led to the small room. This time, the door was locked. She tried the handle carefully, applying just enough pressure to confirm that it would not turn, and then she examined the lock itself more closely. The scratches around the keyhole were numerous and deep, the kind of wear pattern that develops when a lock is opened and closed frequently over an extended period. Sarah heard a sound from outside, the distinctive rumble of a car engine in the driveway, and her heart rate accelerated sharply. She moved quickly back across the basement, up the stairs and into the kitchen, arriving just as Dimitri's key turned in the front door lock. He had come home more than 2 hours earlier than usual, and Sarah had no explanation prepared for why she might have been in the basement. But Dimitri simply nodded at her, asked if the children were sleeping, and when Sarah confirmed they were, he thanked her and went upstairs to his bedroom. Sarah stood in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly, trying to calm her breathing, and wondering what exactly she had stumbled into and whether her growing suspicions were justified or whether she was allowing her imagination to transform innocent behaviors into evidence of something sinister. On October 17th, Anna called Sarah to ask if she would be willing to house-sit on the following Thursday evening while the family went out for Anna's birthday dinner. The children would be staying with Anna's friend Patricia, who lived 3 blocks away, and the Volkovs would be gone from approximately 6 in the evening until 10 or possibly 11, and they needed someone to water the plants, feed the cat, and make sure the house was secure. Sarah agreed immediately, recognizing the opportunity for what it was, a chance to access the locked room in the basement without the pressure of needing to watch the children, or worry about being discovered by Dimitri or Anna returning home unexpectedly. She told Anna she would arrive at 6, and that the Volkovs should take their time and enjoy the evening without worrying about rushing back. The week passed slowly. Sarah went to school, completed her homework, worked her other part-time job at a bookstore on Saturday, and thought constantly about what she would do when she finally had unrestricted access to the Volkov house. She knew that simply looking into the room again would not be enough. She needed evidence, something concrete that would either confirm her suspicions or put them to rest. On Tuesday afternoon, Sarah stopped at a drugstore and purchased a Polaroid camera, the kind that produced instant photographs, along with 2 packs of film. She told the cashier she was documenting a school project, which was not true, but the lie came easily and the cashier did not seem interested enough to ask follow-up questions. Thursday evening arrived. Sarah reached the Volkov house at 6 as planned. Dimitri and Anna were already dressed for dinner, Anna wearing a dark blue dress and Dimitri in a suit jacket. The children had already been dropped off at Patricia's house. Anna showed Sarah where the cat food was kept, pointed out which plants needed watering and which did not, and reminded her that the emergency numbers were posted on the refrigerator. Dmitri and Anna left at 6:12, and Sarah watched through the front window as their car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. Then she stood in the quiet house, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock on the living room wall, and tried to steady her breathing. She fed the cat first, a gray tabby named Smokey who wound around her ankles while she opened a can of food and emptied it into a bowl. Then she watered the plants in the living room and kitchen, following Anna's instructions exactly, buying herself time to build up the courage to go downstairs. At 7:45, Sarah could not delay any longer. She retrieved the Polaroid camera from her backpack and descended the basement stairs. The door to the locked room was closed. Sarah had expected this. She went to the kitchen and began opening drawers systematically, searching for keys. The first drawer contained silverware. The second held cooking utensils. The third was full of miscellaneous items, batteries, rubber bands, twist ties, and a small plastic container filled with keys. Sarah took the container back to the basement. There were 8 keys in total, different sizes and shapes. She tried the first key in the lock. It did not fit. The second key slid into the lock but would not turn. The third key was too large. The fourth key fit and turned smoothly, and Sarah heard the deadbolt slide back with a soft click. She pushed the door open and reached inside to find the light switch. The overhead fixture came on, harsh fluorescent light that made her squint for a moment before her eyes adjusted. Sarah stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, then walked directly to the metal filing cabinet. She tried the top drawer. It was locked, as she had expected. She returned to the kitchen, went through more drawers, and finally found a second set of keys in a cabinet above the refrigerator, hidden behind a stack of coffee filters. The fifth key on this ring opened the filing cabinet. Inside the top drawer were folders, perhaps 20 of them, each containing papers. Sarah pulled out the first folder and opened it on the desk. The documents inside were a mixture of English and Russian text. Some pages appeared to be technical specifications, dense paragraphs describing computer systems and software protocols. Other pages were photographs, reduced in size and printed on regular paper, showing what looked like official documents with stamps and markings in the corners that Sarah recognized from movies and television as classification labels. Words like confidential and secret, visible even in the reduced photocopies. The second folder contained a list of names, typed on a manual typewriter, with addresses next to each name. Several names had been marked with red X's drawn in ink. The third folder held more photographs, these ones showing pages from what appeared to be technical manuals or engineering documents. Sarah's hands were shaking as she set up the Polaroid camera on the desk. She photographed 6 documents, choosing the ones that seemed most clearly suspicious: the list of names, 2 pages of technical specifications with visible classification markings, and 3 of the photograph pages showing official-looking documents. Each time she pressed the shutter button, the camera made a mechanical whirring sound and ejected a photograph that developed slowly over the next 60 seconds. Sarah placed each finished photograph carefully on the desk and continued searching the filing cabinet. The second drawer contained more of the same, folders with documents and photographs. The third drawer held equipment, a camera with a special close-up lens designed for photographing documents at close range, rolls of film, and small plastic cases containing what Sarah guessed were microfiche slides, though she had only seen microfiche readers in the library and was not entirely certain. The bottom drawer contained cash. Sarah counted it quickly, her heart pounding. There were 120 $100 bills, bundled with rubber bands into stacks of 20 bills each. $12,000 total. Sarah heard a sound outside and froze. It was a car door slamming. She waited, barely breathing, listening for footsteps or voices. Nothing came. A neighbor, probably, or someone visiting a house down the street. She gathered the 6 Polaroid photographs, placed them in her backpack, and began the careful process of returning everything to its original position. Every folder had to go back in the exact order she had found it. The cache had to be restacked precisely. The camera equipment had to be arranged the same way. She closed each drawer, locked the filing cabinet, turned off the light, locked the room's door, and returned both sets of keys to their hiding places. By the time she finished, it was 8:37. Sarah sat on the living room couch, her backpack next to her containing 6 photographs that she believed proved the Volkov family was involved in something illegal, and possibly something much worse than that, and she tried to decide what she was going to do next. Sarah did not sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, replaying every moment of the evening, questioning every decision she had made. The Polaroid photographs were hidden in a shoebox at the back of her closet, underneath a stack of old school papers and art projects from middle school that her mother had saved. At 3 in the morning, Sarah got out of bed and retrieved the photographs, studying them again under her desk lamp, trying to determine if what she had found was actually evidence of espionage, or if there might be some innocent explanation she had not considered. The technical documents could be legitimate work materials that Dmitri had brought home, though that did not explain why they would be locked in a basement filing cabinet, or why some of them bore classification markings. The list of names could be a contact list for the Russian immigrant community, though that did not explain the red X marks next to certain entries. The cash could be savings that the family kept at home rather than in a bank, though $12,000 seemed excessive, and the method of storage unusual. But, taken together, the cumulative weight of the evidence suggested something deliberate and covert, an operation that required secrecy and careful documentation. On the morning of October 18th, Sarah showed the photographs to her father. Michael Chen was a practical man, an accountant who approached problems methodically and who valued evidence over speculation. Sarah found him in the kitchen making coffee before work, and she placed the 6 Polaroids on the table in front of him without saying anything. Michael picked up the first photograph, squinted at it, then looked at his daughter with an expression that combined confusion and concern. Sarah explained where she had found the documents, how she had accessed the locked room, and why she believed the Volkov family might be involved in something illegal. Michael's initial reaction was dismissive. He suggested that Sarah was letting her imagination run away with her, that watching too many spy movies had made her see conspiracies where none existed, and that breaking into a locked room in someone's home was a serious violation of trust that could cost her the job. But as Sarah walked him through each photograph and explained the context, pointing out the classification markings and the technical nature of the documents and the significant amount of cash, Michael's skepticism began to weaken. He asked if Sarah was certain about what she had seen, if there was any possibility she had misunderstood or misinterpreted something. Sarah told him she was certain. Michael sat quietly for several minutes, drinking his coffee and studying the photographs, and then he told Sarah they needed to call the FBI. The call was made at 8:30 in the morning on October 19th. Michael identified himself to the person who answered at the FBI Washington field office and explained that his daughter had discovered what appeared to be classified documents in the home of a family she worked for, and that he believed the situation warranted investigation. The initial response was skeptical. The person on the phone, whose name Michael later recalled as being something like Thompson or Thomas, asked several questions in a tone that suggested he received calls like this regularly, and that most of them turned out to be misunderstandings or pranks. But when Michael mentioned that the family in question included a man who worked for a defense contractor with Department of Defense contracts, and that the documents appeared to include technical specifications and lists of names, the tone of the conversation shifted. Michael was transferred to another person, then to a third person, and finally he was speaking with someone who identified himself as Special Agent Robert Crawford from the Counterintelligence Division. Crawford asked Michael to describe what his daughter had found, and Michael went through the details carefully, mentioning the locked room, the filing cabinet, the mixture of English and Russian documents, the classification markings, the camera equipment, and the cash. Crawford asked if they had taken any photographs or removed any materials from the house. Michael hesitated, then admitted that Sarah had taken Polaroid photographs of 6 documents. Crawford's response was immediate. He wanted to see those photographs as soon as possible, and he wanted to interview Sarah directly. A meeting was scheduled for Monday, October 21st, at 9 in the morning at the FBI field office. Sarah and Michael arrived 15 minutes early and waited in a lobby area with gray carpet and uncomfortable chairs. At exactly 9 o'clock, a man in his mid-40s wearing a dark suit and wire-rimmed glasses came through a door and introduced himself as Special Agent Robert Crawford. He led them down a hallway to a small conference room with a table, several chairs, and a recording device on a side table. Crawford asked Sarah to describe everything she had observed about the Volkov family since she began babysitting for them in January, and Sarah provided a detailed account, starting with the discovery of the partially open door on September 12th and continuing through her observations of Dimitri's basement visits, Anna's phone conversations, and finally her decision to access the locked room on October 17th. Crawford took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions. How long had she been working for the family? 8 months. Had she noticed any unusual visitors to the house? No, not that she could recall. Did the Volkovs receive unusual amounts of mail or packages? Sarah thought about this and mentioned that she had noticed several packages with foreign postage, possibly from Europe, but she had not paid close attention to the details. Had Dimitri ever mentioned his work or discussed what he did at Advanced Systems Corporation? Only in general terms, describing himself as a software engineer working on computer systems. Crawford asked to see the Polaroid photographs. Sarah removed them from her backpack and placed them on the table. Crawford examined each one carefully, his expression neutral and professional, revealing nothing about what he was thinking. After several minutes, he placed the photographs in a folder and told Sarah and Michael that the FBI would need to keep the photographs as evidence. He explained that what Sarah had discovered appeared to warrant further investigation, but that he could not discuss the details of that investigation with them. He asked Sarah to continue babysitting for the Volkov family as if nothing had happened, to maintain her normal schedule and routine, and to avoid doing anything that might make the Volkovs suspicious. If they sensed that something was wrong, if they realized they were under investigation, they might attempt to flee the country or destroy evidence, and the entire case could collapse before the FBI had gathered sufficient information to make arrests. Sarah asked how long she would need to continue this deception. Crawford told her he did not know, possibly several weeks, possibly longer. He gave her a phone number where she could reach him directly if she observed anything unusual or if the Volkovs' behavior changed in any significant way. Then he thanked her for coming forward and told her that what she had done required considerable courage. Between October 24th and November 14th, the FBI conducted what Special Agent Crawford would later describe in his case file as an intensive background investigation into the Volkov family, an investigation that revealed details Sarah could not have known, and that confirmed her suspicions in ways that exceeded even the most alarming scenarios she had imagined. The investigation discovered that Dmitry Volkov's position at Advanced Systems Corporation gave him direct access to sensitive computer systems being developed for missile guidance applications, and that several technical documents from his division had appeared in Soviet technical journals within months of their classification, suggesting an active and ongoing intelligence leak. Anna Volkov's work at the Library of Congress, initially dismissed by investigators as low-level and unlikely to provide valuable intelligence, proved more significant upon closer examination. Her translation assignments included diplomatic cables, policy analysis papers, and embassy communications that passed through the library's research division, materials that would be of considerable interest to Soviet intelligence services seeking to understand American foreign policy deliberations and strategic thinking. Most damning, perhaps, was the discovery that the couple who had sponsored the Volkovs when they immigrated to the United States in 1978, a man and woman who claimed to be distant relatives helping family members escape Soviet oppression, had been identified 3 years later as KGB operatives and had left the country abruptly in 1981 before they could be arrested. Sarah continued babysitting on her regular schedule, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and each visit became an exercise in sustained deception that left her exhausted and anxious. Crawford had instructed her to observe specific details about the Volkovs' routine and to report anything unusual, and so Sarah found herself paying attention to things she would never have noticed before. She noted the times Dmitry went to the basement, recording each instance in a small notebook she kept in her backpack. She observed when packages arrived at the house and tried to remember details about the return addresses and postage. She listened carefully when Anna made phone calls, even though she could not understand the Russian words being spoken, trying to detect patterns in the timing and duration of the conversations. The constant vigilance was mentally draining, and Sarah found herself struggling to maintain the casual, friendly demeanor she had always shown with Elena and Alexei, children who had done nothing wrong and who had no knowledge of their parents' activities. On November 1st, Elena asked Sarah why she seemed nervous. The question came while they were sitting at the kitchen table working on a coloring book, and it caught Sarah completely off guard. She had believed she was maintaining her composure, that her anxiety was invisible to the children, but apparently Elena had noticed something in Sarah's behavior that seemed different from the easy confidence she had displayed during previous visits. Sarah told Elena she was worried about a test at school, which was not entirely a lie since she did have an exam coming up in her history class, and Elena accepted this explanation and returned her attention to coloring a picture of a horse. But the incident shook Sarah's confidence in her ability to continue the deception without raising suspicion. The situation became more precarious on November 8th when Anna mentioned during a brief conversation before she and Dmitry left for their evening class that they had been thinking about finding a new babysitter. Anna's tone was casual, almost apologetic, and she explained that Sarah had seemed distracted lately, and that they wondered if perhaps the twice-weekly schedule was becoming too much with Sarah's schoolwork and her other job. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest, a cold fear that her cover had been blown, and that the Volkovs were preparing to either confront her or to flee. She forced herself to smile and told Anna that she had been dealing with some stress at school, but that everything was fine and that she loved spending time with Elena and Alexei. Anna studied Sarah's face for a moment, then nodded and said they would continue with the current arrangement for now, but that Sarah should let them know if things became too overwhelming. After Anna and Dmitry left, Sarah called Crawford from the Volkov's kitchen phone and told him what had happened. Crawford's response was measured but firm. He told her to continue as planned, that the FBI was close to having everything they needed, and that within the next 2 weeks a decision would be made about when to execute search and arrest warrants. On November 15th, Crawford called Sarah at home and told her that the FBI had decided to move forward with the operation. Search warrants had been obtained based on Sarah's initial evidence combined with the FBI's independent investigation, and arrests would be made on the morning of November 18th. The timing was strategic. Dmitri would be at work at Advanced Systems Corporation when FBI agents arrived to take him into custody, and Anna would be arrested at home after she returned from dropping the children at school. Crawford asked Sarah to babysit on the evening of November 17th, the night before the arrests, and to observe the Volkovs carefully for any signs that they were preparing to flee. He told her to look for packed suitcases, to notice if they seemed agitated or nervous, to pay attention to whether they made an unusual number of phone calls or received unexpected visitors. If the Volkovs suspected they were under investigation and were planning to leave the country, the FBI needed to know immediately so they could move up the timeline for the arrests. November 17th arrived. Sarah showed up at the Volkov house at 6:30 as usual. Dmitri and Anna seemed completely normal, perhaps even more relaxed than they had been in recent weeks. Anna asked about Sarah's school and whether she was looking forward to Thanksgiving break. Dmitri played briefly with Elena and Alexei before he and Anna left for their class. Sarah watched the children, fed them dinner, supervised bath time, and put them to bed at 8:30. Elena wanted an extra story, and Sarah read to her from a picture book about a rabbit who was afraid of the dark. Alexei asked if Sarah would be there when he woke up in the morning, and Sarah told him no, that his parents would be home by the time he went to sleep. Everything was ordinary. There were no suitcases, no signs of preparation for departure, no indication that the Volkovs had any awareness of what was about to happen. Sarah played Candyland with Elena before bedtime, a simple board game involving colored cards and a winding path through a fantastical landscape, and she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt as she moved her game piece along the board and drew cards and pretended that everything was fine. These children would wake up tomorrow morning, and their parents would be gone, arrested by federal agents and charged with espionage, and their lives would be permanently altered in ways they could not possibly understand. And Sarah was complicit in that destruction, a willing participant who had set these events in motion by opening a locked door and taking photographs of documents that were never meant to be seen by anyone outside a very small circle of Soviet intelligence operatives and their handlers. At 6:20 in the morning on November 18, 1985, FBI agents executed coordinated search and arrest warrants at 2 locations in Northern Virginia. Dmitri Volkov was taken into custody as he arrived at the offices of Advanced Systems Corporation in Tyson's Corner, approached by 4 agents in the parking lot before he could enter the building, and informed that he was being arrested on suspicion of espionage. Anna Volkov was arrested at the family home in McLean approximately 30 minutes later, after she had returned from dropping Elena and Alexei at school, and at the home of Anna's friend Patricia, respectively. Federal agents entered the house with a search warrant and found Anna in the kitchen making coffee. According to the arrest report filed later that day, Anna did not resist or attempt to flee. She asked only if she could make a phone call to arrange care for her children, and agents informed her that arrangements were already being made through social services. The search of the basement room yielded extensive evidence that would form the basis of the federal case against both defendants. Agents documented and photographed the contents of the filing cabinet, recovering coded communications written in Russian, lists of Department of Defense personnel with security clearances, technical specifications for computer systems used in missile guidance applications, evidence of dead drop locations including detailed maps of Rock Creek Park with specific benches and trash receptacles marked, and additional camera equipment beyond what Sarah had observed during her October 17th visit. The cash Sarah had counted, $12,000 in $100 bills, was seized as evidence of payments received for intelligence services rendered to a foreign power. The investigation that followed the arrests revealed that Dmitry and Anna Volkov were not who they claimed to be. They were what intelligence agencies call illegals, deep-cover operatives who had assumed the identities of real people and who lived under those false identities for years while conducting espionage activities. The real Dmitry and Anna Volkov had died in a car accident in the Soviet Union in 1977, and 2 KGB officers had assumed their names and biographical details, studying their histories and mannerisms carefully enough to pass as legitimate refugees when they applied for resettlement in the United States in 1978. They had been operating on American soil for more than 7 years by the time Sarah Chen discovered the unlocked door in their basement. In March of 1986, after months of closed legal proceedings conducted under strict security protocols due to the classified nature of much of the evidence, both defendants pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage, unauthorized transmission of national defense information, and acting as agents of a foreign government without notification to the Attorney General. Dmitry was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Anna received 25 years. Both would face deportation to the Soviet Union upon completion of their sentences, though by the time those sentences were completed, the Soviet Union would no longer exist, and the question of where to deport them would become significantly more complicated. Sarah testified in a closed hearing in February of 1986, appearing before a federal judge and a small number of attorneys and FBI personnel to describe how she had discovered the evidence that led to the Volkovs' arrests. The proceedings were classified, and Sarah was instructed not to discuss her testimony or her role in the case with anyone outside of immediate family. Special Agent Crawford thanked her formally at the conclusion of her testimony and told her that she had performed a valuable service to her country, but there would be no public recognition of her contribution, no commendation or award that could be shared with friends or mentioned on college applications. Operational security required that her involvement remain secret, protecting both her identity and the investigative methods that had been used to build the case against the Volkovs. Sarah returned to McLean High School and attempted to resume normal life. But the experience had changed something fundamental in how she understood the world and her place in it. She struggled with guilt about Elena and Alexei, the 2 children who had been placed temporarily in foster care while social services attempted to locate relatives who might be willing to take them. In December of 1985, Sarah wrote a letter to Special Agent Crawford asking about the children and whether she could have any contact with them. Crawford responded 2 weeks later with a brief letter explaining that for the protection of the children, who were being given new identities and placed with an adoptive family far from Virginia, no contact would be possible. Sarah kept that letter in a drawer in her desk for years, taking it out occasionally and reading it and wondering what had happened to Elena and Alexei, whether they remembered her, whether they understood why their parents had disappeared, whether they had been told the truth, or whether they too had been given a cover story designed to protect them from a reality too complicated and painful to process. Sarah graduated from McLean High School in 1986 and attended college at the University of Maryland, majoring in criminology with a minor in Russian language. In 1992, she applied to the FBI and was accepted into the training program at Quantico. She spent 23 years as a federal agent, working primarily in counterintelligence, and eventually rising to a supervisory position in the Washington field office. She never publicly discussed the Volkov case during her career, maintaining the operational security that had been required of her since 1985. But in 2015, When a significant portion of the case files were declassified as part of a routine review of Cold War-era intelligence operations, Sarah was finally able to speak about what had happened 30 years earlier. In an interview conducted for an FBI oral history project, she reflected that she had been 16 years old and trying to do what she believed was right, but that the weight of having dismantled a family, even a family that had been constructed as a cover for espionage operations, had stayed with her throughout her life. She said she still thought about Elena and Alexei, wondered where they were, and whether they had managed to build good lives despite the trauma of their childhood. She said she would probably never know the answer to those questions, and that not knowing was perhaps the most difficult part of the entire experience. The understanding that some consequences of our choices remain forever unknowable, hidden behind walls of classified information and protective measures designed to shield the innocent from dangers they never asked to face.